Hey everybody! Happy New Year! Am I a little late in making that proclamation? I know I am. It's mid-February and I'm just getting around to putting together a group of my favorite 20 images of 2018. So I did this last year where I had a little discussion about these 20 images and people seem to like that. So I'm going to do that again this year. I'm going to talk about these 20 images that are not necessarily my best images, but are my favorite images. So that might mean that some of them are technically imperfect or really not that compelling of photographs necessarily, but they are favorites to me. And generally that would be just because of the experience of making them, maybe a particular connection with an animal or a landscape or whatever the situation was that I really enjoyed making that photograph. And I would enjoy it at the end of this if you would leave a comment and let me know what one or two of your favorites were. That I always find that real interesting. There's always a lot of different opinions out there, and that's art. Art is very subjective, so everybody can have and does have different opinions. So with that, let's jump into image number one. This will be in chronological order. So in the order that they were taken during the year last year. So not in order from favorite to worst or anything like that. Just do it chronologically. And first image, I'm going to go with this beautiful lone tree. And this is an image that was made with the infrared camera. My Fuji X-T20, which has been converted into infrared. So I really like that high contrast infrared black and white look. And this is a very simple scene, very high contrast, right? We've got dark black skies and bright white snow and a bright white tree. And that infrared really makes that tree pop with the white. It also darkens down that dark sky as well. We've got the fog, and the cloud kind of mimics the shape of the top of the tree. And I like everything about this one. So I hope you do too. So this one, the image data shows that this was taken at 1/280th of a second at f4 ISO 200. The reason this is a landscape shot, and it's shot at f4, which is a pretty big aperture for a landscape photo, but I found that in infrared images on this Fuji, there's a little bit of a hot spot in most of the lenses, and so as the more you stop down, the more pronounced that hot spot can be. And so I like to shoot those at bigger apertures to prevent that hot spot from happening. All right, next image. This was taken in California. So this is a picture of a Joshua tree on the far right edge of the frame, and its shadow, which is being cast onto one of the big, beautiful granite kind of monolithic boulders that live out there in Joshua Tree National Park. This again, infrared black and white image taken with the Fuji X-T20. This one was taken at 1/170th of a second at f8 ISO 200. I went with a little more depth of field here. I focused on the tree trunk on the right side and then wanted to have the shadow reasonably sharp as well. So another high contrast black and white infrared. Moving along. Here we have another black and white image, but this one is not an infrared image. This is converted. So this is a great gray owl, my favorite subject to photograph, and a lovely image with a beautiful owl coming in to hunt, with light reflecting up off of the snow, casting a bunch of light up into the owl and keeping that background nice and dark. And that background is just blurred out. Boom, totally destroyed with the Nikon 600mm f4 lens, shot at f4. 1/1250th of a second. I like to keep my shutter speed at 1,000th of a second or higher on owls in flight. and this was ISO 3200. And that's what I needed to get to that shutter speed. That was more important to me. So this image looks awesome on the screen right here. Noise-free at this size. And then, you know, the bigger you get, this is with a D850, so this is a very high resolution camera, ISO 3200, and it looks awesome. If I zoom in 1:1 here, you know, it still looks really good. There's a little bit of visible noise, but man, it looks excellent. I could print this sucker large and it would look great. You know, if you were looking at it this close and it's a 60-inch print, you'd see some noise. But if you back up 6 feet, like most people are viewing a 60 by 40 photo, you're not going to notice any noise. It's just going to be sharp as a tack and gorgeous. So I'm not at all concerned about, you know, shooting at ISO 3200 on this camera. This looks great. But this one's just simple, clean, powerful image to me. Great contrast. Great gesture by the bird. I love everything about this one. Very happy with how that turned out. Another black and white image. There seems to be a theme this year, and that theme is not getting it into Lightroom and cranking up the saturation slider and just overdoing everything and making things look ridiculous. This year seems to be me kind of rebelling against that a little bit and going for, you know, monochrome and more muted colors, with a little bit of exception here and there. But I definitely have noticed that people are just cranking up that saturation slider in Lightroom and getting like 10,000 likes on Instagram, and I'm just looking at the image going, my God, you destroyed that image by adding so much saturation. But people seem to like it. Not this guy though. Anyway, this is a beautiful coyote in winter, and nice, you know, contrasty black and white image here, giving me a great gesture. Got him full frame there with the 600 f4. Shot this at 1/800th of a second at f5, ISO 400. I love to shoot f5 on that lens. It's a little bit sharper than f4, and it still gives you a really nice shallow depth of field, but it's noticeably sharper at f5 than it is at f4. And that's the VR2 version of that lens. The newest version might be better than that, but I haven't used that one yet. Okay. Keeping it going. Another black and white image. This one is of a sand dune over in St. Anthony, Idaho. And beautiful shapes, beautiful tones, beautiful textures. This one has it all. I think this one is my favorite image that I took that day and that trip over to the sand dunes. And I like the S-curve on the ridge, and the light was beautiful coming off to the right side. It's a little bit brighter, and then it tails off into darkness on the left, but just that S-curve and the ridge, the beautiful light, you know, being split down the half being darker and half being lighter. And then of course the beautiful textures, the ripples in the sand is just wonderful. Again, infrared, black and white here. Shot at 1/80th of a second, f8, ISO 200. Way cool. This is another one from the sand dune that I like very much. This one was shot with the Fuji X-H1, so this was a color photograph. And I really like the way all this sand kind of converges back into this little dark shadowy hole back there. And for me, I love the texture, and I love just kind of the convergence of everything going back to that little dark hole. And then there's a little bit of mystery back there to me in that upper right corner of, wow, it's a dark hole back there. What in the hell's back there? And I really like that about this one. So everything leads you back up there, and then you don't really know what's there because it's so dark. But love this one. Fuji X-H1, 1/170th of a second, f11, ISO 200. Moving along, another great gray owl. This one has a little more of a leucistic characteristic, and that leucistic means it's got a deficiency of melanin in its feathers that make the feathers lighter in tone. So this one is much whiter through its feathers than a typical great gray owl, and it makes it, really stunning in the forest. And this is a really good kind of depiction of that color, in that I've got 4 bright white aspen tree trunks with a nice dark conifer background, and then of course the owl poking its head out, with the white face, similar in tone to those white aspen trunks. I think it's a really powerful image. I like the pattern of the 4 trees, and then you break up the pattern with this owl. That's the surprise, as you see just that it's a dark photo with 4 lines on it, and then there's one thing there that's out of place, and that's the great gray owl. And so I really adore this image. This one was taken with the Nikon D850 and the Sigma 100 to 400 millimeter lens, shot at a very slow 1/60th of a second. The lens was wide open at f6.3 and ISO 1600. So this was after sunset, and it's starting to get pretty dark. So at ISO 1600, I know I'm going to get really good image quality. If I crank that up, into the 3200, 6400, I start to see a little bit of noise. The image quality just deteriorates a little bit. And I wanted this one to be, as good as I could realistically get. And I think at a 60th of a second, I know I could still get a nice sharp photo of this bird as long as it's not moving. So I dropped my ISO back down to get to 60th of a second, make that shot, and then crank it back up to hopefully get some flight shots. I didn't get any after this particular photo that day, but that's why I chose those settings on this image. It was quite dark out there. Moving along. So this one I think is one that qualifies as not a great image necessarily, but I enjoyed making this image so much that this is on my list of top 20 favorite images. So this is the famous Grizzly 399. And I've made a ton of photos of her over the years, and she's a favorite of mine and of every photographer who's ever photographed her, and certainly adored by millions of people who've seen her in the wild here in Grand Teton National Park. She's an icon for sure. And that is part of why this photograph is in my favorites. This is obviously a very tight image, so I was very close to her while making this image. The bright white claws are like the trigger, and it's a really tight close-up of her grazing on some fresh grass in the spring. And you can see on this photo, on her muzzle, on the left side of her face, you can see there's a scar there. And that is the kind of best way to identify her. You can't always see it depending on the conditions and depending on where she's looking. So you can usually identify her based on other things like her behavior and her location and which cubs she has with her and those kind of things. But that's a pretty definitive way. So I like that this photo shows that scar, so I know that it's her. It's a very tight, intimate photo of her, eking a meal out of those little tiny fresh green grasses in the spring and the white claws. But I made this image out of the window of my vehicle as I was stuck in a bear jam. So a lot of the times when the bears come right next to the road, the park rangers clear everything out and give the bears some space. In this particular case, it was like total chaos broke out. The bear just came out of the woods, boom, she was immediately in the road, and traffic was just totally wedged both directions. And the rangers could not clear it out in time, so I'm literally stuck, 20 cars in front of me, 20 cars behind me, and then both sides of the road are totally blocked off, and there's nowhere to go. So what's a guy to do but take pictures of the beautiful bear? And she's very tolerant of vehicles, and she's used to them, and she uses them actually, the theory is that she uses them as protection from big males who like to kill grizzly cubs so they can mate with her. So she's a very smart bear, And it's just nice to be able to be in close presence to her in a safe situation where you're in your vehicle. And was able to make a couple of photos as well. So that was pretty darn cool. So that one was taken with the Nikon D850, the 200 to 500 millimeter lens, 1/640th of a second at f5.6, and another high ISO, 3200 ISO there. But when the bear's that close to you, you need a really high shutter speed. The closer your subject is to you that's moving, the higher a shutter speed you're going to need to freeze that action. So a 6/40th of a second would be like the minimum I would want here, but ISO 3200 was kind of the maximum I wanted here. So I maxed out both of those and the image turned out great. All right, continuing along, here is a really spectacular photo. I coined the term the super killer photo buzz after I made this. You can watch that video. I'll link to that one in the description. I was out filming a vlog that day, and it was a great surprise. I was out there doing just a sunrise photo shoot here. I was set up at the edge of this spring pond that only appears some years, and it's lovely for reflection of the Tetons, and it was a beautiful morning, and it was going to be partly cloudy and cold, so I knew we'd get some mist. And so I was there. There was one other photographer there, and we were just shooting this gorgeous sunrise, and all of a sudden a moose appeared, a cow moose appeared off to the right there, and we were both super excited about that. She came over and had a drink, and then about 30 seconds later, this little tiny baby moose like hobbled out into the scene and took a drink of water, and so it had to be very young, just a couple of days old at most. And they just walked across the edge in front of us and then disappeared out into the forest. And I had to make some real quick setting adjustments there because I was set up on a tripod at base ISO 64 and with exposure delay mode on. And so once this happened, I had to make a real quick change to be able to capture this. So I knew I wanted about a 60th of a second minimum to freeze any action of them walking slowly across there. So I turned off the exposure delay mode real quick, cranked up the ISO to 200, opened up my aperture to 5.6, and so I ended up at 1/60th of a second, f5.6, ISO 200, and it turned out lovely. I have a big 48-inch wide print of this hanging above my dining room table. It's a really cool photo. I love this one. Okay, here we are with another great gray owl image. So this owl is another leucistic owl that's lighter in color than most, and it works perfect for this photograph because it's sitting at the top of this tree. Like, this is a great environmental photograph of an owl. And this, like, every time I look at it, it reminds me of being in the woods and looking for these owls and photographing them. And like, this is just classic, this big, beautiful owl out, I can just envision it flying out of the dark forest up into the top of this tree as the sun is setting and beginning its hunt for the evening out in this gorgeous meadow. And that's exactly what happened here. And I've watched that happen 1,000 times, not in this particular location, but that's what this image is to me. And I hope it has some kind of meaning for you as well. But, it's like the subject of the photo is like less than 1% of the actual photograph. And the rest of it is the story that you're creating in your head about what's going on here. And that's what the story is to me. And I love this image because of that. It's like this big, beautiful meadow and just this dense forest and a gorgeous white owl. Everything works here for me. This was taken with the Nikon D850 and the 100 to 400 millimeter lens, 1/100th of a second, f8, ISO 500. Here we have another one where the subject of the photo is very small in the frame. And this is obviously a bison. So this is like a very Grand Teton National Park photo to me. It shows the Tetons. It shows an iconic species of wildlife here, the bison. It's gorgeous, spring, summer grasses, beautiful green grasses. And blue sky and the dark kind of afternoon thunderstorm clouds. Everything just works for me here. This lone bison out in the plains with the gorgeous backdrop and the beautiful clouds just works great here. This is a Nikon D850, 1/1600th of a second, f5.6, ISO 200. And, you know, in hindsight, I could have shot that at ISO 64. It'd be just a tiny bit cleaner, and I certainly didn't need a 1/1600th of a second shutter speed here, but the image turned out beautiful. If I had one thing to do differently here and kind of second guessing Monday quarterbacking myself here is if I'd gotten lower. I remember going down and taking a knee here, but if I'd gotten as low as I possibly could here, I think it would make that bison a little more powerful in the frame. So that would be one I wish I had experimented with getting even lower here. See how that would have looked, but great image. I like that one a lot. This is another great gray owl. This one is not leucistic, but it's in very pretty backlight in the forest here on a nice perch. The way that its feathers are glowing with the backlight is all wonderful, but then this one frame out of a little burst of 3 that I usually take, this one included a hummingbird flying by in the upper left corner there. So to me, I think that gives it a lot extra than if it was just the owl sitting there. I mean, it's a pretty photograph of the owl, but throwing a hummingbird blazing by all lit up by the backlit sun there as well. Even though you might not even be able to tell what that is, I think it's pretty cool. So that's why it's in here. I think it's pretty cool. Hope you do too. This is taken with the Fuji X-H1 at 400 millimeters, 1/125th of a second, f5.6, ISO 1250. And the next photo is another infrared black and white. And this one's an interesting photo. It's something I've never really seen before. So bull moose are generally, they like to hang out amongst themselves in groups of bulls or all alone. And on this day, I was photographing a cow, a mother with her 2 newborn calves. And they're a few months old now in this photo, but I was photographing them, and then this bull moose stepped out into the forest, and I kind of was wondering what was going to happen here, because you don't usually see them socializing together like that. And everybody played nice, but I was just curious as to what was going to happen there. And the cow didn't feel like she was being threatened, or she didn't act aggressively towards the bull. And the calves walked right up to the bull and kind of checked him out. And like, to here it almost looks like they're kind of saying hello, like snuggling, maybe even a little kiss on the cheek kind of picture here. And I have no idea what's actually happening here, but in my head, I'm kind of creating the story of that this is probably their dad, and that's their mom, and that she's letting him come say hello, because he's probably never met these calves before, if they are in fact his offspring. And so anyway, that's the story I told myself of what was happening here. I have no idea what's really going on. And but anyway, I love this photo because of that. It was a really cool thing to watch happen, and make some nice photos. And then that really high contrast black and white infrared really makes them pop. You know, in just a normal color version here, all that sagebrush is much darker and kind of a similar tone to the animal, so they don't really stand out as much in the frame. But I really like this one, mostly just because of the story and watching it unfold, and the story I conjured up in my head of that this is the first time they're meeting their father, and who knows what's really happening. But that's what happened in my head when I made this photo. So infrared black and white, 1/125th of a second, f5.6, ISO 3200. Here we go, another infrared black and white. This one is, let's call it kind of abstract. Not a traditional bison photo. High contrast, black and white, with, you know exactly what it is when you look at it though, although it's abstract, if you want to call it that. It's beautiful bison horn and that dark, thick, gnarly fur that bison have, and it's a nice tight close-up of that. very graphic, and that's what I like about it. High contrast and very graphic. And just a little different view of a bison than you're used to seeing. And thought it turned out cool, so I dig it. Infrared, 1/250th of a second, f8, ISO 1250, 400 millimeters. All right, here we go, on to mountain lion. So this mountain lion, let me take its picture, and that in itself is very special. Anytime you can find a wild mountain lion that lets you take its picture, it's spectacular. I made a whole video about this, telling the story of how this all went down. I'll link that below, so watch that if you're interested in that. I'll give you like the real quick version here, but just finding a wild mountain lion is awesome. On this particular day, I found 4. It was 3 cubs and a mother. And this was the only one that let me photograph it, which is still great. And it's a wonderful photograph too. Not only just getting a picture of a wild mountain lion is awesome, but getting a good picture, like an interesting, well composed, just it's a cool picture that I really like. So of course it's going to be in my top 20 here. But as I said, click the link below if you want to watch the whole story of that. This was a really special day to be able to see these wild mountain lions and photograph them. Really cool. Here we go. This is a picture of a leaf. I don't think I've ever had a picture of a leaf before in my top 20. Definitely not. But this was, I was hiking back to my car after photographing black bears. And when I was crossing the creek, there was this lone orange-yellow aspen leaf caught in a little eddy in the rocks in there. And I kind of watched it for a minute just because it was cool to just watch, kind of mesmerizing. And then I was like, oh, maybe I should take a picture of that. And so I used my 500 millimeter lens and got in tight on it and underexposed it big time because it was dark in there. And it was after sunset, and that water is real inky black. So I don't remember what I had it at, but probably at least -2 on exposure compensation to keep that water inky black. And then that leaf, the color just really popped. So it looked great. But anyway, so this was ISO 800, f5.6, 1/500th of a second. The leaf and the bubbles and that drop of water on the leaf, they all make me happy. Okay, next one, we've got a bull moose. This is another non-traditional photograph of a moose. And you can't even see the moose. All you see is his antlers, but that's what I love about it. I was serendipitously up on a little hill here, looking down over this big meadow, and saw those 2 gigantic antlers walking around out there. And that was really cool. So, it was a nice bonus that those willows are all kind of a purpley red hue, and there's some fall yellow colors in the background, and the light was nice. And so everything worked here. It's kind of a weird photo, right? And all you see is the moose's antlers. But, those willows are way taller than I am. And so this is how a lot of moose spend their time, in these gigantic meadows filled with willows. And so this is really important habitat. And this is kind of I think, very representative of what a bull moose's life is like. They spend a lot of time just walking around out in those willows like that. So I was thrilled to be able to capture this image, and also that was the biggest bull moose I photographed all year. So that was an extra great bonus that it was a really nice, big, beautiful bull. So this was the Nikon 500 millimeter PF lens again, 1/400th of a second, f8, ISO 200. Okay, on to another bull moose. This one was taken right at sunrise. This moose just walked over this ridge, and I was kind of down below it here, and me being below it actually helps the photo. It gives him kind of a little more impressive stance above me there, but the light was fantastic. The background was nice and dark, so I underexposed it here again to keep that background really dark and prevent all that side light from really blowing out. But he popped up over that ridge and just kind of surveyed the scene, like, he was checking it out, because I think he's kind of the badass of that area. Wanted to make sure no other competing bulls were around, and so he just gave me a real nice pose and let me know that this was his area, and it was a beautiful light and a beautiful stance, so that all worked great. This was the Nikon D850 with, again, that 500mm PF lens, 1/400th of a second f5.6 ISO 400. All right, now we are leaving the Tetons. We're off to Hawaii, the magical place, the magical island of Maui. And I was just out in the morning taking some pictures of sunrise and the waves and just having an absolute blast, photographing something different than what I'm used to and enjoying the ocean and Hawaii and the different smells and the noise of the ocean and all that stuff. Just having an absolute beautiful morning out there. And then there were some people walking down the beach, and one of them, I was like, oh, they're going to walk right in front of me here. I got this beautiful pristine sand, and they walked right through my scene, and I was like, oh, perfect. I got 3 footsteps there. And, you know, it was like very quickly I had to make that photo, and then the next wave came and washed them away. But so that was one of those things where I was tempted to go like, oh, could you guys walk around behind me here, please? And I'm sure they would have, but they just kept walking on the direction they were going, and I let that happen, and I liked what happened next with having 3 footprints in the sand there. So it's worked out great. The colors are just beautiful and soft, and it just reminds me of my beautiful trip to Hawaii. So that's the only Hawaii image that made it into this, which seems a little weird. Anyway. Here we go. This is the final image of the set of 20, and this is Mr. Tough Guy. And this was very strange light on this evening. I don't even know how to describe it, but it was very strange light. And anyway, this bull moose was, he was out there commingling with a couple other bulls, and then he just kept coming closer and closer. And he got close enough that I was able to get a full frame portrait of him here with, again, that Nikon 500mm PF lens and the Nikon D850, 1/320th of a second f5.6 ISO 800. And again, this was underexposed by probably 2 stops to keep everything very dark, because this is a big, dark animal, and the camera, the light meter sees that, and then it thinks it's very dark. It tries to brighten that up a bunch. So I got to tell that I want this thing to be dark and to really make him look, you know, tough. Focus right on that eyeball, bang, and make that photo. And then because that light was so weird, it had a real strange quality and a real strange color that I just couldn't get the photo to work the way I wanted in color. So this was taken with the D850, not the infrared. And I like it a lot better once I took the color out, because the color just had a weird thing happening that night. I don't know if it was like forest fire smoke in the air, or who knows. There's all kind of reasons why it could have been funky, but it was just funky. And so black and white here works for me. I love the image. It's just real powerful to me. So anyway, 1/320th of a second, f5.6 ISO 800. Did I say that already? I don't know. Okay, that's it. So that's going to wrap it up, my long-winded ramblings about 20 images that I made in 2018. So thanks for hanging in there till the end on this. Leave me a comment below. Let me know which ones you liked and why. And that actually helps. I can learn from that on what people are digging and why they like some of the images, because everybody has such different perspective on things. So that is helpful. But anyway, I'm done talking, and I'm sure you're done listening to me talk. So the next video, I'll be back to being out in the field, doing another vlog, instead of being here at the computer. So keep an eye out for that one, and please subscribe if you haven't already. And that's it. Have a great day, and see you next time, top 20 in 2020. Sheesh. That's crazy to think about. All right, bye-bye.